Section. Introduction. We're going to talk about a method called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, which is also known as preference-based reinforcement learning. This technique is used to optimize policies based on relative feedback, rather than absolute feedback. It's easier for humans to provide comparative feedback rather than absolute scores for an agent's behavior, which is why RLHF has been successfully used in various fields, including robotics, recommendation, and retrieval. Recently, RLHF has gained popularity as a technique for fine-tuning large language models. The most common approach to RLHF is through reward-based RLHF, which is a two-step process. First, we train a reward model to assign higher scores to preferred behaviors over non-preferred ones. Then, we optimize this reward function using a reinforcement learning algorithm. However, this approach has some drawbacks. For instance, it assumes that there's a total order over agent behavior, meaning that there are no inconsistencies in rater preferences. This contradicts what we know about human decision-making from psychology. Moreover, when preferences from a large group of raters are combined, it's unlikely that this total order will be maintained. Another issue is that due to the inherent randomness of human preferences, we often end up with a reward model that leads to a lack of diversity in generation. For example, if an agent can choose between two options, each preferred by half of the raters, we might end up with a model that slightly favors one option over the other. If we optimize our policy under this model, we would end up choosing one option almost exclusively, leaving half of the raters unsatisfied. To address these issues, some researchers have proposed alternative approaches that don't rely on reward models. One promising approach frames RLHF as a two-player zero-sum game between two policies, each trying to produce behavior that a rater prefers over the others. However, this approach, while theoretically elegant, is unstable in practice due to the inherent instability of adversarial training. In response to these challenges, we propose a simple, theoretically sound, and empirically effective approach to RLHF that doesn't require reward modeling or adversarial training. Our approach is based on two key insights. First, by framing RLHF as a two-player zero-sum game, we can completely eliminate reward models and better handle the noisy, inconsistent, and non-Markovian preferences that often occur in practice. Second, by taking advantage of the game's symmetry, we prove that we can train a single agent in a self-play fashion, eliminating the need for unstable adversarial training. In practical terms, this means sampling multiple trajectories from the agent, asking a rater or preference model to compare each pair, and setting the reward to be the trajectory's win rate. We call this approach SPO, self-play preference optimization. Our contributions are as follows. 1. We developed SPO, an algorithm for RLHF that avoids reward modeling, compounding errors, and adversarial training. By using the concept of a minimax winner from social choice theory, we can frame RLHF as a two-player zero-sum game. We then use the symmetry of the game's payoff matrix to prove that we can train a single agent against itself. 2. We investigated the convergence properties of SPO. When there are inconsistent preferences, we prove that SPO converges to an approximate minimax winner at the rate of the underlying no-regret algorithm. We also prove that if there is an underlying reward function, our approach converges to the optimal policy at a fast rate that matches that of standard techniques. 3. We demonstrated that SPO performs better than reward model-based approaches on a suite of continuous control tasks with realistic preference functions. Our approach learns more efficiently than reward model-based approaches across a variety of preference setups. This includes comparisons based on ground truth Markovian rewards in the easiest case, stochastic preferences, non-Markovian preferences, and inconsistent preferences induced by aggregating over subpopulations. The strong performance of SPO in these challenging setups, all of which are motivated by practical situations, is illustrated in figure. Section Summary. Reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, is a technique that optimizes policies based on relative feedback rather than absolute scores. However, the use of reward models in RLHF can lead to issues such as assuming a total order over agent behavior and a collapse in generation diversity. To address these concerns, the authors propose a reward model-free approach called self-play preference optimization, SPO, which frames RLHF as a two-player zero-sum game and trains a single agent in a self-play fashion. They demonstrate that SPO outperforms reward model-based approaches in various preference setups, including stochastic and non-Markovian preferences. Section: Related work. Let's talk about the related work in the field of dueling bandits and dueling reinforcement learning, RL. The idea of preference-based optimization of a multi-armed or contextual bandit as a two-player zero-sum game has been explored by many researchers. Some have conducted a detailed theoretical study of this two-player approach in contextual bandits, using the term von Neumann winner to describe the concept of a minimax winner. We also use this term due to its historical roots in social choice theory. Recently, there has been a surge of interest in studying dueling reinforcement learning algorithms from a theoretical perspective. Unlike previous studies, we don't assume that preferences are explained by an underlying reward function. We build on previous work by using their method of reducing RLHF to adversarial MDP solving. However, we go a step further by using the structure of the problem to develop single-player algorithms, while all previous approaches require adversarial training. In both the bandit and sequential settings, previous work has considered single-player algorithms for RLHF. However, these results require strong linearity assumptions and are only applicable in the bandit domain or assume an underlying Markovian reward function. In contrast, we provide a method to reduce to no-regret online learning that allows one to use any no-regret algorithm, like online gradient descent, without additional assumptions. Specifically, by using a recent result, we prove that we can use a variation of the natural policy gradient, which practical policy gradient algorithms like PPO and TRPO approximate, to efficiently compute minimax winners. Our work is similar to a concurrent study that derives a specific algorithm, focuses on quantal response equilibria to prove last iterate convergence, and treats the problem as a normal form game. However, we focus on a general algorithmic framework, provide convergence guarantees to the Nash equilibrium, and account for the sequential nature of the game. They focus on learning document summarization from human feedback, while we study continuous control tasks where we experiment with a range of realistic preference functions. Recent work has formulated inverse RL for LLM fine-tuning as a kind of self-play. We, however, focus on optimizing from preferences rather than from demonstrations. Our reward model baseline and our continuous control setup are heavily influenced by previous works. One key difference from this prior work is that we only assume the rater can perform trajectory-level comparisons, a much less dense form of supervision. Recently, several authors have proposed eliminating reward models from RLHF by directly optimizing the policy by substituting it into the classification loss usually used to train the reward model. While these approaches are appealing for their conceptual simplicity and ease of implementation, they suffer from the same issues with intransitive and noisy preferences as they are derived on the basis of an implicit reward model. Additionally, they can suffer from compounding errors due to their offline nature. In a sense, this family of approaches can be thought of as the preference-based analog to behavioral cloning techniques in imitation learning. In contrast, the technique we propose is the preference-based analog of inverse reinforcement learning approaches. Now, let's move on to the main topic of our paper: reinforcement learning from human feedback via game solving. We'll start by introducing the notation we will use throughout the paper before defining our solution concept and deriving an efficient algorithm to compute it. Consider a finite horizon reward-free Markov decision process, MDP, parameterized by four elements: the state and action spaces, the transition operator, and the horizon. We use specific terms to denote the space of trajectories and the space of histories of a certain length. In the preference-based RL setup, we are given query access to a preference function which, given two trajectories, outputs a scalar that indicates which is preferred relative to the other. This could be either a preference model trained on an offline dataset or a human in the loop. The former setup is similar to reward-based RLHF, except that the reward model learning step is replaced by learning a pairwise preference model, which is more natural when learning from pairwise preference data. In the alignment of generative models, sometimes the preference function simply consists of a prompted generative model that is asked to compare two outputs, rather than a model trained explicitly on a preference dataset. In this setting, we are able to optimize directly based on the outputs of such a model, rather than having to take a detour through a reward model. By construction, preference functions are anti-symmetric. We assume access to a convex and compact policy class. Section summary. In the related work section, the authors discuss previous research on preference-based optimization in multi-armed or contextual bandits and dueling reinforcement learning algorithms. They highlight their approach of utilizing a reduction to no-regret online learning, which allows for the use of any no-regret algorithm without additional assumptions. They also compare their work to other studies that focus on specific algorithms or tasks, while they provide a general algorithmic framework and consider the sequential nature of the game. Additionally, they mention the drawbacks of approaches that eliminate reward models from reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, and propose their preference-based analog of inverse reinforcement learning approaches. Section: A brief introduction to social choice theory. Let's delve into the fascinating world of social choice theory. This theory is all about making the best selection from a range of options, based on the diverse preferences of a group of people. Imagine we have a group of people, each with their own preferences over a set of options. One might think the best way to make a choice is to go for the option that is preferred over the most other options. This method, known as the Copeland winner, seems logical, but it often leads to multiple winners, which raises the question of how to break ties. For instance, if half the group prefers one option and the other half prefers another, choosing either would leave half the group unhappy. This problem becomes even more complex as the number of options increases. It's unlikely that there will be one option that everyone prefers over all others. In fact, methods that train reward models, like reward-based RLHF, or those that implicitly assume them, like DPO, are similar to computing Copeland winners. However, this approach can lead to dissatisfaction. For example, if we have a situation where no reward function can explain the preferences, the model is forced to break a tie between two options, potentially leaving half of the group unhappy. This tie breaking is often based on noisy data used to train the reward model, making it arbitrary. One potential solution to this problem is to randomize. We could try to pick a distribution over options so that we prefer samples from this distribution to those from any other distribution with a certain probability. This means that while we can't always make everyone happy, we never pick a solution that consistently makes a significant portion of the group unhappy. This approach is similar to computing the Nash equilibrium of a two-player zero-sum game with payoffs given by the preference function. We can define the minimax winner, also known as a von Neumann winner, as a pair of strategies that always exist, unlike a unique Copeland winner. We can always collapse any distribution to a single policy while preserving solution quality by performing a weighted average. This means we never need to maintain a distribution over policies. The minimax winner doesn't require an underlying reward function, making it truly reward model free. If there is an underlying reward function that explains the observed preferences, the minimax winner coincides with the optimal policy for that reward. Now, let's turn our attention to efficiently computing minimax winners. Efficient algorithms for computing Nash equilibria of two-player zero-sum games have been a central focus in computational game theory. The usual solution is to run two no-regret algorithms against each other, a strategy known as dueling. However, this technique has its drawbacks, including instability and memory issues. So, we ask, do we actually need two players to compute minimax winners? We prove that we only need a single player due to the anti-symmetry of preference functions. We can compute this symmetric minimax winner by running a single no-regret algorithm against its own iterations. We also prove that reward-based RLHF algorithms do not generally compute minimax winners. However, standard RLHF algorithms applied iteratively with each batch of preferences collected on policy and at a high frequency may be able to compute minimax winners on average. Finally, we prove that when there exists a clearly optimal policy, our algorithm converges to it at a fast statistical rate. This matches the rates for UCB-style methods, previously studied in more restricted versions of the dueling setup. Section Summary. Social choice theory explores how to select options that satisfy the diverse preferences of a population. One approach is to use Copeland winners, which select the option that beats the largest number of other options. However, Copeland winners may not be unique and can lead to unsatisfying solutions, so an alternative is to compute minimax winners, which are the Nash equilibrium of a two-player zero-sum game. Section SPO. Self-play preference optimization. We're discussing a method called self-play preference optimization, SPO. This method is typically used for problems that involve a single step and a small, discrete policy class. However, when we move to a sequential setting with a larger and often continuous policy class, scaling this approach becomes challenging. So, we need to find a suitable no-regret algorithm to optimize the sequence of SPO losses in the reinforcement learning setting. To solve this, we use the concept of local regret minimizers. Imagine a problem with a finite number of states. At each state, we can independently use a no-regret algorithm that optimizes over a certain parameter, feeding it a loss that depends on the cumulative reward received after leaving the state. This way, no matter the state distribution our policy results in, we can ensure that we're improving at each iteration. We also need to consider that our reward function is at the trajectory level, meaning we need to have a regret minimizer at each history rather than at each state. We've developed an SPO that uses history-dependent soft policy iteration as its policy optimizer. We've also found that with the right settings, running this algorithm for a certain number of iterations guarantees a certain level of approximation to the minimax winner, a concept that comes directly from our theorem. In practice, we often use a deep network to represent our policy. For certain policy parameterizations, the natural policy gradient, NPG, algorithm is equivalent to the soft policy iteration procedure. Many standard deep reinforcement learning algorithms like TRPO and PPO are motivated as approximations of NPG, while techniques like SAC can also be viewed as approximate soft policy iteration. Another issue we need to address is how to assign credit with trajectory level feedback. If we can't provide rewards for each time step in the problem, our options for policy optimization are quite limited. We suggest a simple solution to this problem. Just split the trajectory level reward equally amongst all state action pairs. We've proven that doing so preserves policy optimality. In theory, SPO requires sampling multiple trajectories per policy update. In practice, we simply keep a queue of a small, fixed size and use the win rate against this queue for labeling trajectories sampled from the current policy. This makes our approach easy to implement on top of any policy optimization method of choice. So far, we've assumed access to a preference function which can be queried at each round with new trajectories. However, in some settings, it's desirable to directly obtain the preference labels from humans or other expert models, where online querying is not possible. SPO is compatible with batched queries in these settings. We've conducted experiments to compare SPO against an iterative reward modeling approach. We've looked at whether SPO can compute minimax winners when faced with intransitive preferences, whether SPO can match or exceed sample efficiency on problems with unique Copeland winners or optimal policies, how robust SPO is to stochastic preferences, and whether SPO can handle non-Markovian preferences. Our experiments show that even when compared to a maximally iterative reward-based method, SPO performs better across a wide set of preference structures. Section Summary. In the section titled, SPO, Self-Play Preference Optimization, the authors discuss the challenge of scaling distribution over policies in the sequential setting with a large and continuous policy class. They propose using the idea of local regret minimizers to optimize the sequence of SPO losses in the RL setting, leading to the soft policy iteration procedure. They also address concerns about credit assignment with trajectory level feedback and the frequency of querying the online preference oracle. In the experiments, they compare SPO against an iterative reward modeling approach and evaluate SPO's performance on various preference structures, including intransitive preferences, maximum reward preferences, noisy preferences, and non-Markovian preferences. Section. Discussion. We've developed a straightforward algorithm that doesn't rely on reward modeling or adversarial training, yet it's highly resilient to various challenges such as noisy, inconsistent, and non-Markovian preferences, as well as the accumulation of errors. Instead of directly tackling the zero-sum game, we take advantage of the game's structure and adopt a simple, stable self-play strategy. Our method is not only efficient but also outperforms a reward model baseline in a range of continuous control tasks. Looking ahead, we're keen to incorporate techniques from the field of imitation learning. This could help us eliminate the less efficient reinforcement learning step and minimize the exploitation of the preference model. We're also eager to test our method in different areas such as language modeling or content recommendation. Given the similarities between our method and interactive imitation learning methods, which are known to be resilient to unseen confounders, we're curious to explore whether our method can better manage situations where human preferences are influenced by information that the agent can't observe. Acknowledgements. ZSW's work is partially funded by the NSFFAI Award No. 1133926, a Google Faculty Research Award, a J.P. Morgan Faculty Award, a Facebook Research Award, an Okawa Foundation Research Grant, and a Mozilla Research Grant. GKS would like to express his gratitude to Drew Bagnall for his valuable feedback.